Right now, in the middle of Manhattan's East River, there is an island where New Yorkers jog and walk their dogs past the ruins of buildings most of them know nothing about. A century ago, those buildings held the mentally ill, the criminally insane, and thousands of children with nowhere else to go. What happened inside those walls led to one of the largest and most controversial child relocations in human history. And to this day, an estimated 2 million Americans are living with a family name that isn't really theirs. The island sits between Manhattan and Queens, barely 2 miles long and 800 feet wide at its widest point. Today, it is called Roosevelt Island. Before that, it was called Welfare Island. But for most of its history, it was known by the name of the family that farmed it for over a century. Blackwell's Island. Starting in the 1830s, New York City began using this narrow strip of rock for a single purpose. It became the place where the city sent everyone it did not want to see. A penitentiary opened in 1832, a charity hospital followed, then a workhouse, then an almshouse for the destitute, then a smallpox hospital for the dying, and in 1839, the New York City Lunatic Asylum opened its doors. Think about that for a moment. One island, less than 2 miles long, holding a prison, a poorhouse, a plague hospital, and an asylum for the insane, all within walking distance of each other, all hidden from Manhattan by a curtain of water, out of sight, out of mind. That was the entire philosophy. Of all the buildings crammed onto that narrow strip of rock, one would become the most infamous. The New York City Lunatic Asylum was the city's first municipal facility for the mentally ill. It was supposed to be a place of treatment and recovery. The main building was designed with an octagonal tower at its center, meant to project authority and calm. The grounds were meant to be therapeutic, fresh air from the river, views of the Manhattan skyline, a place where the troubled mind could heal. That was the idea. The reality was something else entirely. Almost immediately, the asylum was overwhelmed. New York's population was exploding, with immigrants arriving by the thousands. The city had no system for handling mental illness. Families who could not cope with a disturbed relative had two choices: keep them locked in a back room, or send them to Blackwell's Island. Most chose the island. By mid-century, the asylum was packed far beyond capacity. Patients slept on floors and wore rags. The staff was largely made up of inmates from the penitentiary next door, convicts assigned to watch over the mentally ill. The food was rotten. The water was filthy. Patients who arrived with treatable conditions deteriorated. Patients who arrived by mistake could not get anyone to listen. And then, in 1887, a 23-year-old journalist did something no one had ever tried before. Nellie Bly, whose real name was Elizabeth Cochran Seaman, convinced the New York World newspaper to let her go undercover inside the asylum. She practiced staring blankly in front of a mirror. She checked herself into a women's boarding house and acted confused until the police were called. A judge declared her insane, and just like that, she was committed to the Women's Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell's Island. What she found inside would shock the entire country. Patients were forced into ice-cold baths and held under the water. The food was thin broth with chunks of something unidentifiable floating in it. Spoiled beef, bread so hard it could not be broken with a knife. Patients who protested were beaten. Women who cried were dragged by their hair. The nurses, many of them barely trained, treated the patients with open cruelty. One nurse told Bly that the institution would straighten her out. Another said that the more she tried to prove she was sane, the crazier they would think she was. One of the most disturbing things Bly reported was how easy it had been to get committed. She had fooled a judge, several doctors, and a panel of medical experts. None of them detected that she was perfectly sane. And once she was inside, no amount of rational argument could get her out. The more clearly she spoke, the more certain the staff became that she was delusional. That raised a terrifying question. If a healthy journalist could be locked away this easily, how many of the women on that island were not mentally ill at all? Bly spent 10 days inside those walls. When the newspaper finally secured her release, she published her account under the title 10 Days in a Madhouse. The public was horrified. A grand jury investigation followed. The city allocated an additional $1 million to improve conditions on the island. Reforms were promised. Some were even implemented. But nothing fundamentally changed. The asylum continued operating. The patients kept coming. The overcrowding got worse. And the island kept its secrets. But the asylum was only part of the horror. Because Blackwell's Island did not just warehouse the mentally ill. It also warehoused children. In the same complex, steps away from the asylum wards, the city operated an almshouse where the destitute were sent when they had nowhere else to go. And among the destitute were children, orphans, children whose parents had died of typhoid, yellow fever, or cholera, children abandoned by families too poor to feed them. Children as young as 5 years old, locked in the same buildings as the dying and the insane. The almshouse was not designed for children. There were no schools, no playgrounds, no separation between the young and the old, the healthy and the sick. A 5-year-old orphan could be sleeping in the same room as an elderly man dying of tuberculosis. The food was the same slop served to every inmate on the island. The supervision was the same convict labor force that ran the asylum. These were not separate populations living in separate worlds. They overlapped. Children in the almshouses could hear the screams from the asylum wards at night. The mentally ill wandered the same grounds as families with infants. The entire island operated as a single machine for making the unwanted disappear. In 1863, during the New York City draft riots, an angry mob burned the colored orphan asylum on Fifth Avenue to the ground. 233 black children were evacuated through the back of the building while the mob stormed the front. Those children were transported under armed guard to Blackwell's Island. The place where New York sent its unwanted received even more unwanted. By the 1850s, New York had an estimated 30,000 homeless children living on its streets. The newspapers called them street Arabs. That term says more about the era than about the children. They slept in alleyways and sewer pipes. They sold matches and rags to survive. They formed gangs for protection. Police arrested children as young as 5 and threw them in cells with adult criminals. The city's orphanages were bursting, its almshouses were hellish, and Blackwell's Island was already full. If you have ever traced your family tree and hit a dead end somewhere in the 1800s, keep watching, because what happened next may be the reason why. Even before Nellie Bly exposed the asylum, the crisis on the streets had already driven one man to desperate action. In 1853, a young minister walked through the streets of Lower Manhattan and decided he had seen enough. Charles Loring Brace was 27 years old when he founded the Children's Aid Society. He was horrified by what he saw in the streets and in the institutions. He despised almshouses. He believed orphanages were warehouses that crushed the spirit out of children rather than building them into functioning adults. And he had what he considered a radical idea. Send the children west. Brace believed that the best asylum for any outcast child was a farmer's home. Fresh air, honest work, Christian family values. He envisioned a system where homeless children from the city would be placed with rural families who would raise them as their own. In 1854, the first group of 46 children boarded a train out of New York City. Their destination was Michigan. They had no idea where they were going. Many of them had never left the city. Some were as young as 5. They carried small suitcases with whatever they owned, which for most of them was almost nothing. A change of clothes, sometimes a Bible, no photographs, no documents, nothing connecting them to the lives they were leaving behind. When the train pulled into a small town, handbills had already been posted announcing the arrival of homeless children available for placement. The children were taken to a church or a town hall. They were lined up on a stage, and the townspeople came to look them over. Farmers walked up to children and pried open their mouths to check their teeth. They squeezed their arms to test their strength. They asked them to sing or recite something to prove they were not simple. Boys were valued for how much labor they could provide. Girls were valued for domestic work. If a family liked what they saw, the child went home with them that night. If nobody chose a child, that child got back on the train and did it all over again at the next stop. One rider later recalled the humiliation of standing on that stage, being examined and rejected, watching strangers walk past you like you were not good enough, and then the train whistle, and the whole thing starting over again in another town you had never heard of. Brothers were separated from sisters. Older siblings watched younger ones be chosen and carried away by people they had never met. Some children were separated from their families and never saw each other again for the rest of their lives. They spent decades searching. Some never stopped. Between 1854 and 1929, those trains carried 250,000 children to new lives across 45 states and parts of Canada and Mexico. Some of those lives were extraordinary. In 1859, 2 boys rode the same orphan train to Indiana. One was called the homeliest and most unpromising boy anyone had ever seen. A judge took him in anyway. He went to Yale. He became the governor of Alaska. His name was John Green Brady. The other boy ran away from his placement. He lied about his age and joined the Union Army during the Civil War. After the war, he entered politics. He became the governor of North Dakota. His name was Andrew Burke. 2 boys, same train, same year. Both became governors. It is one of the most remarkable coincidences in American history. And then there was the most extraordinary orphan train rider of all. A boy named George Alexander Aberle, born in Brooklyn in 1908. His mother died when he was young. He and his siblings were placed in the Brooklyn Hebrew Orphan Asylum. In 1917, at the age of 9, George and his twin sister were put on a train to Kansas. A family in a small town called Chanute adopted them. George grew up, changed his name, and eventually made his way to Los Angeles. He lived under the first L in the Hollywood sign. He wore white robes and sandals. He ate only raw fruits and vegetables. He claimed to live on $3 a week. And in 1947, he walked into a theater where Nat King Cole was performing and handed a piece of sheet music to a man backstage. The song was called Nature Boy. It became the #1 hit in America for 8 consecutive weeks. It was covered by Frank Sinatra, David Bowie, and dozens of others. The orphan train rider who had been shipped to Kansas as a nameless child had written one of the most famous songs of the 20th century. He spelled his name in all lowercase letters because he believed only God and infinity deserved capitals. The world knew him as Eden Arbez. Almost no one knew where he came from. Eden Arbez was proof of what an orphan train child could become. But his story was the exception, and the exceptions made it easy to ignore what was happening to the rest. Many farming families did not want children, they wanted labor. Boys were worked from dawn until after dark. They were not sent to school, they were not paid, they were not treated as family, they were treated as property. Some were beaten, some were starved. And when they were no longer useful, some were simply sent back. One boy, known only as Albert in the records, was placed with a farming family that worked him 18 hours a day. He was not allowed to attend school. He was not allowed to go into town. He was not treated like the family's own children. He died before he turned 30. The system that was supposed to protect these children had almost no oversight. The Children's Aid Society employed only a handful of agents to monitor tens of thousands of placements spread across 45 states. The goal was 1 visit per year. Most children never received even that. Families who abused or exploited children faced no consequences. There was no legal framework, no accountability, no one watching. But the cruelty was not always hidden. Sometimes it played out in broad daylight, and the country chose to look the other way. In 1904, the New York Foundling Hospital sent 40 young children to be placed with Catholic families in the mining town of Clifton, Arizona. The families who had been approved were Mexican American. When white residents of the town saw that white children had been given to Mexican families, they formed an armed mob. They kidnapped the children. The case went to the Arizona Supreme Court. The court sided with the kidnappers. The Children's Aid Society claimed an 87% success rate, but success was measured by a single standard. Did the child avoid becoming a criminal? That was it. Not whether they were happy, not whether they were loved, not whether they were beaten every night in a farmhouse 1,000 miles from anyone who remembered their real name. Many of those children carried the shame of being a trained child for the rest of their lives. They never told their own families where they came from. They buried the truth so deep that their children and grandchildren had no idea. And the system that was supposed to rescue these children from the horrors of places like Blackwell's Island often replicated those same horrors in private homes across America. The abuse just happened behind closed doors instead of behind institutional walls. No journalist went undercover in a farmhouse in Kansas. No grand jury investigated a family in Iowa. Out of sight, out of mind. The same philosophy that built the island in the first place. Blackwell's Island was eventually renamed twice. In 1921, the city renamed it Welfare Island, a bitter irony given how little welfare had ever been delivered there. The last asylum patients were transferred out. The buildings began to decay. The penitentiary closed. The hospitals shut down. The island sat mostly abandoned for decades, its buildings crumbling, its history fading. In 1973, New York renamed it again. It became Roosevelt Island after the president who had lived with polio. A tram was built connecting it to Manhattan. Apartment buildings went up. Today it is a quiet residential neighborhood. People raise families there. They push strollers past the crumbling remains of the smallpox hospital. They have no idea they are living on the same ground where the mentally ill were beaten, where children were locked away with the dying, and where a 23-year-old journalist risked her freedom to tell the truth. The octagonal tower of the original lunatic asylum is the only part of the building still standing. It has been incorporated into a luxury apartment complex called the Octagon. The apartments start at over $3,000 a month. The marketing materials describe the building's historic character. They do not mention what happened inside it. The smallpox hospital ruin still stands at the southern tip of the island. It is the only landmarked ruin in New York City. At night, it is illuminated. Tourists photograph it from the Manhattan side of the river. Most of them think it looks beautiful. The Orphan trains ended in 1929. An estimated 2 to 3 million Americans alive today are direct descendants of orphan train riders. Many of them carry names that were assigned at a train station by a stranger who picked their ancestor off a stage, like livestock at auction. The first reunion of orphan train riders did not happen until 1962, more than a century after the first train left New York. Many of the people who attended had never spoken publicly about what happened to them. They had carried the shame of being a train child in silence for their entire lives. Charles Loring Brace believed he was saving children from places like Blackwell's Island, and for some of them, he was. But the deeper truth is harder to accept. America did not solve the problem of its unwanted people. It moved them from island to asylum, from asylum to almshouse, from almshouse to train, from train to farmhouse. Each time the solution looked humane on paper. Each time the reality was something else. The buildings on Blackwell's Island are mostly gone now. The ruins that remain are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Joggers pass them every morning without a second glance. But the question the island asked a century and a half ago is still unanswered. What do we do with the people nobody wants? An estimated 1 in 25 Americans alive today is a descendant of an orphan train rider. Many of them have no idea. If this story connects to your family, Or if you have ever found a gap in your family history you could not explain, let us know in the comments. And if you want to make sure stories like this one keep getting told, subscribe to Ward Files. We document the places America wants to forget.